Why wasn't anyone else seeing it? The shadows shifted against the northern wall, two silhouettes almost bleeding into the jagged stone. Controlled movement, deliberate, not the chaotic stumble of friendlies under fire. No, this was patience, trained patience. She lowered her breath, let it thin out in her chest until it was nearly invisible. Her eye pressed closer to the glass, the circle of her scope shrinking the world. She tracked the taller figure's rhythm, the measured steps, the way the man lifted his weapon just high enough to test the air. Predators. But still she held, because she knew the weight of being wrong, knew how easily a single decision could unravel trust. And right now, in this shredded mission, trust was thinner than the desert air. Captain Dorsey's voice cracked through her hesitation. We hold here until extraction. No more movement, no more risks. He didn't see them. He wasn't even looking. He was too focused on holding ground, clinging to the order he'd been given like a lifeline. She almost envied him that orders gave people something to hide behind. She didn't have that luxury anymore. Reyes slammed another magazine into his rifle, muttering curses into the dust. He wanted to charge, to push forward and burn through his fear with action. His hands shook just enough to betray him. She'd seen those shakes before, in the hands of her brother, in the weeks before he left. Her brother. The memory cracked through her, jagged and sharp. She remembered the night he left for his last deployment, the one he never returned from. They sat on the porch, the summer heat thick and suffocating, mosquitoes buzzing against the yellow porch light. He'd leaned back in the old chair, boots planted, his rifle slung across his lap even though they were miles from war. You'll be better at this than I ever was, he'd told her. His voice had carried that reckless warmth she'd always envied. You don't know it yet, but you've got steel. The kind people depend on when everything else falls apart. She laughed then, waved him off. I'm not like you. He'd smiled, that lopsided grin that hid more than it showed. Yeah, that's the point. And then he was gone. The report had come weeks later, cold and efficient. Ambush, insurgents, no survivors. She hadn't cried, couldn't. Instead, she'd sworn quietly without telling anyone that if he couldn't finish what he'd started, she would. She would carry the weight. She would be the steel when the world began to break. And now here she was, on a mission collapsing under its own weight, the walls closing in, silence pressing like a vice. The two figures on the wall shifted again, closer this time. Her finger twitched against the trigger. But still she didn't shoot. Because shooting meant revealing what she knew. Shooting meant breaking the fragile illusion that someone else, anyone else, was in control. Shooting meant stepping out of the silence and into the open, where there was no going back. She let her breath out, long and steady. Movement north wall, she said finally. Her voice was low, flat, but it carried. Reyes froze mid-curse. Dorsey's head snapped toward her. What? 2, maybe more, not hours. Silence swallowed the group. Even the radio seemed to pause, as if waiting. Dorsey's jaw tightened. He didn't want to believe her. He wanted certainty, proof, a reason not to change the plan, but proof doesn't wait. Show me, he demanded. She didn't answer, just angled her rifle, let him press close enough to see through her scope. The faint outlines of two shapes easing along the wall, moving like the night belonged to them. Dorsey's face shifted. Doubt flickered, then hardened into something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Reyes' hand tightened on his weapon. Then what the hell are we waiting for? Hold, Dorsey snapped again, but his voice lacked conviction now. She lowered her eye from the glass, studying him in the half-light. His shoulders hunched, his breath uneven. He was unraveling just as the mission was. And she realized something then. They were waiting for someone to decide. Not the commander in the sky, not the faceless voice over the radio. Someone here, someone now. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She lifted her rifle again. And in the stillness, she made the choice her brother would have made. The rifle cracked, A thunderous snap in the night. Echoes rolled across the compound. One of the figures on the wall jerked backward, a dark spray against the stone. Chaos erupted, shouts in a language that wasn't theirs. The second figure dove low, scrambling. Other shapes emerged from the shadows, pouring toward the breach like water through a crack. Rays cursed loud, firing wild bursts into the dark. Dorsey barked orders, his voice sharp, desperate. The radio lit up with frantic voices. And through it all she remained steady. Her breath, her aim, her silence, the rhythm she had carried since the day she lost him. Shot after shot, she anchored the unraveling thread. The others didn't notice it yet, didn't realize the line had shifted, that the mission now balanced not on command, not on orders, but on her will to hold it together. But they would. And when they did, they would understand why she hadn't spoken until now. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence is waiting for the moment that matters. And tonight, this was that moment. She reloaded with practiced ease, eyes never leaving the scope. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the grit and fire, a quiet thought surfaced. This wasn't about surviving. It was about finishing what he couldn't. It was about being the steel. And as the night closed in and the gunfire rose like thunder, she whispered it to herself. Not a prayer, not a vow, just truth. I won't let it collapse. The words vanished into the storm. But her fire remained. What happens when a mission breaks apart and there's no plan left to follow? That was the question hanging in the air, even if no one dared say it out loud. The compound ahead spat back gunfire, sharp cracks echoing across the broken stone. The night sky flickered with muzzle flashes, brief bursts of orange that lit faces tight with fear. She pressed lower behind the crumbling wall, sand grinding against her elbows. The weight of her rifle pressed into her shoulder, familiar, grounding. But the weight inside her chest was heavier still. Her shot had torn open the silence. Now there was no going back. Contact north wall, multiple hostiles. Dorsey's voice rang out, but it was hoarse, raw at the edges. He sounded less like a commander and more like a man shouting at the dark. Rays fired back-to-back bursts, his breathing ragged, his jaw locked tight. Spent casings clinked against the stone, bouncing down into the dirt. He muttered between shots, words she couldn't catch, maybe prayers, maybe curses. Her focus narrowed again. She caught movement, 3 men this time, slipping along the wall, fast, confident. Reinforcements. They weren't just probing, they were surrounding. She fired, one down. The others scattered, ducking behind rubble. The radio hissed to life. Eagle 1 report status. Dorsey grabbed it, shouting above the noise. We're pinned. Heavy contact on north wall, numbers unknown, requesting immediate extraction. A pause, then a reply, calm and distant like it came from another world. Extraction delayed. Repeat, extraction delayed. Hold position. The line went dead. Rays barked out a laugh, bitter and jagged. Hold, we won't last 5 minutes out here. Dorsey slammed a hand against the wall. Shut up and fight. The team fired into the dark, bullets carving through dust and stone. Shouts in a foreign tongue rose from the other side, closer now. The air burned with smoke and cordite. Through it all she kept steady. Her scope cut through chaos, every shot measured, every breath controlled. She had trained herself to listen past the noise, to hear the spaces between, where silence lived, where focus thrived. But even in silence, she couldn't escape the echo of a thought. This was her choice. Her shot had pulled them into this storm. And now, if they fell, their blood would be on her hands. She clenched her jaw, pressed the thought deeper. No, if she hadn't fired, they would have been blind. Caught from the shadows, this wasn't guilt. This was survival. Still the doubt lingered, heavy and unshakable. A shadow moved to her right, not hostile, friendly. Sergeant Malik dropped beside her, sliding into cover, chest heaving. His face was streaked with dirt, his eyes wide but alive. You see them, he asked, voice tight. She nodded. You saved us back there, he said. She didn't answer. He glanced at her, studied the calm on her face. Don't carry it alone. Her breath hitched, just for a second, because how could he know? How could he see it? But then another burst of gunfire rained down, and Malik turned back, firing blind into the night. His words stayed with her, though, buried under the noise. Don't carry it alone. She couldn't remember the last time anyone said something like that to her. Another memory surfaced. Her brother again, sitting on the porch that last night, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. When it breaks apart out there, and it will, you don't have to hold it all, not by yourself. She hadn't understood then. She thought he was talking about the mission, about tactics, about survival. Now she wondered if he'd been talking about her. The thought dissolved as a flash lit the wall. Grenade. Down, she shouted. The blast tore into the stone, shaking the ground, showering them with shards. Ray screamed, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. Malik crawled to him, dragging him deeper into cover. Dorsey shouted into the radio again, voice cracking, demanding extraction, demanding backup. But she tuned it out, focused. The breach, that's what they wanted. Push them back, break their line, flood the compound. If that happened, it was over. She scanned, there, a runner low to the ground carrying something heavy, a satchel. Explosives. Her breath stilled. She squeezed. The runner dropped, the satchel spilling, detonator clattering across the stone. A small victory, not enough, but enough to hold the line a little longer. Her hands trembled then, just slightly. She gripped the rifle harder, forcing the tremor away. No one could see it. No one could know. Because if they knew, if they saw the cracks, they'd lose what little faith they had left. And she couldn't let that happen. Malik dragged Ray's to cover, pressing a rag against the wound. Stay with me, man. Just stay with me. Ray's eyes darted unfocused, his lips trembling. He wasn't cursing anymore. He was whispering, soft, broken words. Tell her I tried. The photo, his little girl. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just war. These were lives, threads tangled together, fragile and fleeting. She wanted to tell him he'd make it, that he'd see her again. But lies felt heavier than bullets. So she said nothing. Instead, she turned back to her scope, anchored by silence, by the rhythm of her breath. The mission was collapsing, piece by piece. But she would not. Not yet. Because if she broke, everything else broke with her. Her eyes scanned the wall again, searching, waiting, listening past the noise. And in the quiet edges of the night, a new thought took hold. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to hold. To hold until the impossible became survivable. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. What happens when the night grows longer than you thought it could? That question clung to her as the hours stretched, broken only by gunfire and silence. She lost track of time. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like moments. The fight was no longer about moving forward. It was about holding, just holding. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, her throat raw from the dust. Every shot burned her muscles, but her mind wouldn't let her stop. Because she knew the second she faltered, the line would break. And once broken, there would be no stitching it back together. Ray's groaned behind her, his arm wrapped in Malik's makeshift bandage. He had gone quiet now, too quiet. His face was pale, lips dry, eyes flickering between awareness and the pull of unconsciousness. Malik crouched beside him, whispering things she couldn't hear, words meant to anchor Ray's to this world. She wanted to believe they would work. She wanted to believe he'd survive long enough to see his daughter again. But in the dark corners of her mind, she knew the truth. War rarely gave that kind of mercy. She turned her scope back to the wall. Hostile movement had slowed but not stopped. They were probing, testing, waiting for a mistake. And mistakes came easy when men were tired, bleeding, afraid. Dorsey's voice cut through, sharp and clipped. "We can't stay pinned here. If they circle, we're boxed. We need a fallback." "A fallback to where?" Malik snapped. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired. "We don't even know if extraction is coming." The silence after his words was louder than the gunfire had been. Because no one wanted to admit it. They didn't know if anyone was coming. The radio had been dead for almost an hour. Static was the only reply. She shifted her gaze, studying Dorsey. His shoulders hunched, his eyes darted. He was unraveling faster than the mission. His orders were sharp, but his conviction had dulled. And she realized again what she had felt earlier. They were all waiting for someone to decide, someone to carry the weight. Her breath caught. Was that someone her? She didn't want it to be. But silence had its price. A sudden crack split the night, a single sniper round slicing the air like lightning. The round slammed into stone inches from Malik's head, spraying shards across his face. He dropped flat, dragging Ray's lower with him. "Sniper!" Her pulse hammered, but her movement stayed controlled. She swept her scope across the rooftops, scanning for glint, for shadow, for the faintest shift. There, far to the east, perched in the hollow of a ruined tower, invisible to the naked eye, but her brother had taught her how to see what others missed. She inhaled long and steady. Exhaled. Her shot cracked through the night. The figure tumbled backward, rifle clattering against stone. A silence followed, not relief, not yet, just the heavy pause of an enemy recalibrating. Malik lifted his head, sweat streaking his brow. "You just saved both of us." She didn't respond. She couldn't, because the thought clawed inside her. What if she hadn't seen it? What if her silence had cost them? But this time, silence had saved them. For now. Her hands trembled. She pressed them tighter against the rifle. She remembered another tremble, her brother, the night he told her he was leaving again. He had tried to hide it, holding his coffee cup steady, but she'd seen the shake. She had wanted to stop him then, wanted to tell him she needed him to stay. But she hadn't. She stayed silent. And silence had cost her everything. Now she wondered if every silence carried a price. The night pressed heavier. The compound loomed, shadows shifting along its broken walls. The enemy wasn't rushing now. They were patient. They knew exhaustion was its own weapon. Malik crawled closer, his voice low. "We can't hold like this forever. We need a plan." Dorsey snapped. "The plan is to wait for orders." She almost laughed. Orders. What were orders worth when the sky stayed silent? Ray's groaned, whispering again. Malik leaned closer, then looked at her. His eyes held something heavy. "He's asking for you." Her chest tightened. She crawled closer, laying her rifle down just enough to free her hands. Ray's face was pale, lips cracked, eyes glassy. "Hey," she whispered. His lips trembled. "Tell her I tried, please tell her." She swallowed hard. The photo flashed in her mind. A little girl, hair like silk, eyes bright with life. "You'll tell her yourself," she said softly. He shook his head, weak, fatting. Her throat burned. She wanted to promise. She wanted to lie, if only to give him peace. But the truth pressed heavier. She couldn't promise him survival. Not here, not tonight. So she took his hand instead, held it firm. "I'll make sure she knows," she whispered. His breath hitched. A faint smile flickered. Then his eyes closed and his hand went limp. Silence. Her heart cracked, but she held her face steady. Malik bowed his head, lips moving in a quiet prayer. Dorsey looked away, jaw tight, pretending he didn't notice. She picked up her rifle again, her hand steadier than before. Ray's was gone. But his last words were now hers to carry. She scanned the wall again, hostiles moving, circling, patient. Her fire steadied, her silence sharpened. The mission was collapsing, but she would not. Because now it wasn't just about her brother. It was about a little girl who would need to know her father had not failed, and she would not let his story collapse in the dust. The fight surged again, louder, closer. The enemy pressed. Bullets shattered stone. The knight screamed. But her will was iron. Her grit anchored the line, and her fire burned on. How long can a line hold before it breaks? That was the question echoing in her mind as the night bled on, darker and heavier than before. She could taste the fatigue in her mouth, metallic and bitter. The smoke burned her lungs with every breath. Her eyes stung from dust and the dry sting of gunpowder that clung to everything. The compound ahead had gone quieter but not empty. The enemy was circling, patient, as if they too knew that time could be a weapon. She could feel their presence pressing against the edges of the dark, testing, waiting for the weakest moment to strike. Her finger rested lightly against the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. The silence demanded patience, and she had learned long ago that pulling the trigger too soon could cost more than waiting. Malik crouched beside her, his face shadowed, his shoulders heavy. He hadn't spoken since Ray's body had gone cold. The silence between them wasn't empty, though. It was thick, suffocating, filled with everything they didn't want to say. Finally, Malik broke it. His voice was low, gravel scraping against exhaustion. "We can't leave him here." Her jaw tightened. She didn't look at him, she couldn't. He went on, softer. "If we go, if we get out, we bring him. He doesn't stay here, not like this." Her eyes stayed fixed on the scope, but her chest tightened. He was right. Ray's story couldn't end in the dirt, nameless, faceless. She thought of the little girl in the photo, the weight of the promise she had made with her silence. "He comes with us," she said quietly. Malik nodded once, firm. That was enough. Dorsey's voice broke through then, sharp and brittle. "We're not moving anyone until we get clearance. You hear me? You drag that body now, you slow us down, you put us all at risk." The anger in his voice wasn't strength. It was fear, gnawing at the edges of his control. She finally turned her eyes from the scope, meeting his. "He comes with us." Her tone wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, but it carried a weight that froze him. For a moment, Dorsey looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not just another soldier in the dirt, but something heavier. Someone willing to carry what he couldn't. He didn't argue again. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the wind and the distant scuff of enemy boots against stone. And in that silence, another memory surfaced. Her brother's boots on their porch, the night he'd left. He'd leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the dark. "It won't be the bullets that break you," he had said. "It'll be the silence, the weight of everything you don't say." She hadn't understood then, but now she did. The silence was breaking her more than the fight. Gunfire ripped through the night again, sudden and violent. Bullets slammed into stone, sparks flying. Malik dropped flat, dragging Ray's body closer. Dorsey shouted, his voice swallowed by the storm. She pressed her cheek against the stock, the world shrinking back into that small circle of glass. Shadows darted, 3, maybe 4. She picked them off one by one, each shot deliberate, each exhale steady. The last figure vanished into the dark, slipping back into silence. But silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like the moment before a collapse. Her body trembled now, not from fear but from exhaustion. Every muscle screamed. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because if she stopped, the line broke. And if the line broke, Ray's sacrifice meant nothing. Her brother's memory meant nothing. Malik crouched close again, whispering through the noise. "You can't hold it all, not alone." She didn't answer, couldn't. Because deep down she knew he was right. But she also knew she didn't have a choice. The radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that made them all flinch. Then a voice, faint, almost drowned in the hiss. "Eagle 1 copy." Dorsey grabbed it, desperation flooding his voice. "We're here, we're holding, extraction's overdue, what's the status?" The reply came broken, fractured by distance. A bird down, secondary route compromised, hold until dawn. The radio went dead again. Hold until dawn. Her stomach clenched. Dawn was hours away. They would have to hold against an enemy who outnumbered them, who circled like wolves, patient and hungry. And she knew dawn wasn't a promise. It was a gamble. Malik let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Dawn, that's the plan now. Just wait for the sun like it's gonna save us. Dorsey didn't answer. He just pressed his back against the wall, eyes closed, whispering those names again. The ritual she'd overheard before. Names of the dead. Her eyes returned to the scope, searching, scanning. The night stretched on, endless. And in the edges of her mind, another memory surfaced, one she had buried deep. Her brother's funeral. The flag folded tight, handed to her trembling hands. The silence of the crowd pressing against her chest, suffocating. The words spoken over his casket, empty, formal, stripped of the man he had been. She had stood there, face blank, tears locked inside. She had promised herself then that she wouldn't cry, wouldn't break, that she would honor him not with tears but with steel. But now, as the night pressed harder, as the silence grew heavier, she wondered if maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe honoring him wasn't about being unbreakable. Maybe it was about carrying what mattered, even if it broke her. A sharp whistle cut the air, mortar. Down, she shouted, throwing herself flat. The blast tore through the ground nearby, shaking the wall, spraying dust and stone. Malik shielded Ray's body, curling over him. Dorsey covered his head, his lips still moving, still whispering names. Her ears rang, her body ached, but she pushed herself back up, pressed her cheek to the stock again. Through the haze she saw them coming, dozens this time, shadows rising from the ground like smoke, flooding toward the breach. Her heart pounded, her breath caught. This was it. The collapse. She fired, again and again. Each shot cracked like thunder, each bullet slowing the wave but not stopping it. Malik joined in, his weapon spitting bursts into the dark. Dorsey too, his fear drowned now by the desperate instinct to survive. But the wave pressed closer. Her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded fast, hands steady despite the chaos. The night roared. Her mind screamed. And through it all her silence burned. She wasn't holding for herself anymore. She was holding for Ray's. For Malik. For her brother. For the promise she had made in the quiet spaces between words. The mission was collapsing. But she would not. Not until the dawn. The night had no mercy. Minutes crawled, stretched into hours, and every second dragged like a blade across already raw nerves. The mortar blast had rattled them all, but it wasn't the explosion that was killing them. It was the waiting, the silence between the storms. The silence was worse than the noise. She lay pressed against the dirt, cheek stiff against the rifle stock, the metal cold and unyielding against her skin. The scope wavered with each breath. Her eyes were red, dry, stinging. She couldn't even remember when she'd last blinked. Malik crouched to her left, his hand resting on Ray's shoulder as if the contact tethered him to something human. Dorsey was further back, rocking slightly, his rifle across his knees. He was whispering again. The names, always the names. She wasn't sure if it was prayer, penance, or madness. She couldn't blame him. Silence was dangerous. It made the mind eat itself. Her body screamed for rest, for release. Her fingers tingled with fatigue, her shoulders burned, her heartbeat thudded in her throat like war drums. But she couldn't let go of the rifle, not even for a moment. Because the second she did, the silence would break. The enemy wasn't gone. She could feel them, see them in the shapes that moved between shadows, the glint of steel under faint moonlight, the shuffle of boots trying to remain quiet. Wolves circling, patient, relentless. She was the wall between them and Malik, between them and Ray's body, between them and the line that could not break. But cracks were spreading. A memory drifted back uninvited. The first time she had pulled a trigger, she had been 16. Her brother had taken her to the range, a battered old .22 rifle propped against her shoulder, his arms guiding her stance. She had squeezed the trigger, the small recoil jolting her, the bullet punching a hole clean through the paper target. She remembered the sound of her brother's laugh then, full, proud, alive. "See," he had said, ruffling her hair. "It's not about force, it's about stillness. Breath steady, silence steady, control the quiet and the shot will follow." She had believed him then, believed that silence was a weapon. But here, in this broken compound with the dead at their feet and the enemy circling closer, silence didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like a curse. A sudden crack split the air. Sniper fire. The wall near her head shattered, stone splinters cutting her cheek. She ducked instinctively, dragging Malik down with her. "Sniper," she hissed. Dorsey hit the ground hard, clutching his helmet. "They've got eyes on us." Her pulse surged. She couldn't stay pinned, not here, not in the open. She rolled into position, scanning through her scope, searching for the flash. A rooftop maybe, or the jagged edge of a ruin. Her breath slowed, heart pounding in her ears. There, a faint shimmer, the ghost of movement in the dark. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, clean, sharp. The shimmer vanished. Silence returned. But it wasn't relief. It was the kind of silence that meant more were coming. Malik touched her arm gently. His voice was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. "You're bleeding." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, smearing dust and blood together. Not enough to matter. He studied her for a moment, eyes heavy with something deeper than exhaustion. "You can't keep carrying all of it." She didn't answer. Her throat was tight. He leaned closer, his whisper urgent. "I see what you're doing. You're holding it in, burying it under silence. But it's eating you alive. You don't have to be the wall, not alone." Her grip on the rifle tightened. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. That silence was her armor, that if she spoke, if she let it out, it would break her. But the words stuck. Because deep down, she knew he wasn't wrong. The night dragged. The enemy tested them again and again, small bursts of gunfire, probing attacks that melted back into shadows. Each one chipped away at their strength, forced them to burn more ammo, more energy, more willpower. By the time the moon was high, her hands trembled against the rifle. Her breaths came ragged, shallow. Her vision blurred, doubled. Her mind wandered where it shouldn't. She thought of her brother again, but not the proud mentor at the range. She thought of his face the day he came home the last time, gaunt, hollow, eyes shadowed by something he wouldn't name. He had sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug he never drank from, staring into nothing. When she had asked if he was okay, he had only said one thing. "The silence is louder when you come home." She hadn't understood then. But now, in this collapsing mission, with death pressing in on every side, she did. Silence was where the ghosts lived. And they were living inside her now. Dorsey suddenly snapped, his voice breaking through. "We're not gonna make it, you hear me? They're playing with us. They're waiting until we're too tired to fight back." His voice was too loud, echoing against the stone. She hissed sharply, "Quiet." But it was too late. A volley of gunfire erupted from the dark, bullets chewing into the wall, sparks flying. They hit the ground hard, dust choking the air. Malik cursed under his breath, dragging Reyes closer, shielding him even in death. She pulled herself back to the scope, firing into the muzzle flashes, cutting them down one by one. Her hands were steady even as her body screamed. Dorsey was firing wildly now, panic in every shot. "We're dead, we're already dead." Her chest clenched. His fear was contagious, dangerous. It threatened to spread, to crack the fragile line they were holding. She turned sharply, grabbing his vest, yanking him close. Her voice was low, fierce, the first time she had raised it all night. "Not while I'm breathing, you understand me." His eyes were wide, pupils blown, breath ragged, but something in her tone cut through. His hands steadied on his rifle, his breathing slowed. The silence returned, and she knew she had to carry more than her rifle now. She had to carry them. Hours passed in fragments of noise and quiet. Each time she thought the silence might finally mean safety, the enemy reminded them it was only a pause. Her body was breaking. She could feel it. Her eyelids dragged like lead, her arms numb, her back screaming. But she didn't stop. Couldn't. Because the moment she did, the line would collapse. And she couldn't let that happen. Not for Ray's. Not for Malik. Not for the promise she had made to her brother's memory. The silence was cracking her open. But she would bleed into it before she let it break them. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed faintly, a sound so ordinary, so out of place it jolted her. Dawn was closer. Not here yet, but closer. Her lips parted, breath shaky, and for the first time in hours she whispered, not a command, not an order, not a warning. Just a word. Hold. Malik looked at her, eyes wide with something like disbelief. Dorsey, too, his fear momentarily stilled. It was the first word she had spoken beyond necessity. And it carried more than orders ever could. Because it wasn't just about surviving. It was about meaning, about weight, about carrying what silence couldn't. The night wasn't over. The collapse wasn't done. But something had shifted. The silence had cracked. And through that crack, dawn was beginning to bleed. The horizon was beginning to change. Not fast, not bright, just the faintest bleeding of gray into black, like the night itself was tired of holding on. She noticed it first, always watching, always searching the silence for meaning, the sky's edge softening, the air losing some of its sharp chill. Dawn. It should have been a comfort. But in war, dawn was a double-edged blade. Light revealed, light exposed, and when you were barely clinging to ground you hadn't planned to hold, exposure could kill you faster than the night ever could. Her cheek ached against the rifle stock, raw and tender from hours of pressure. She shifted slightly, the smallest movement, and felt pain shoot down her spine. Her body wasn't a body anymore. It was just nerves and fire stitched together by sheer stubbornness. Malik sat cross-legged nearby, eyes half shut, whispering verses she couldn't quite catch. His rifle lay across his lap, his fingers brushing it like prayer beads. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't resting, just keeping his mind tethered. Dorsey knelt with his back to the wall, his face a mask of grime and fatigue. His whispering had stopped. The names, whatever ghosts he'd been clinging to, were quiet now. Maybe he'd run out of voices. Maybe hers had cut through more than she realized. And Ray's lay between them all, shrouded under a tattered poncho, still in death as he'd never been in life. The silence around him was heavy, unforgiving. She exhaled slowly, the sound harsh in her ears. The mission wasn't dead yet, but it was close. She thought back to the briefing, before all of this had unraveled. The room had been bright, sterile, humming with the nervous energy of men who thought they knew what was coming. She had sat near the end of the table, her voice drowned out by louder ones, her concerns brushed aside as contingencies. She remembered the way they looked past her, not unkindly but dismissively, as if her silence was agreement. But her silence had been warning. She had seen the flaws, she had seen the gaps, and she had said nothing because she knew they weren't ready to listen. Now, staring into the fading night, she wondered if that had been her first mistake. Not speaking, not demanding they hear her. Because silence could protect, but silence could also damn. Movement. Her breath caught. Through the faint gray of pre-dawn she saw them, shapes slipping between rubble, shadows breaking into men. The enemy was coming again, but this time not as wolves circling. This time as predators ready to strike. She raised her rifle, sighted in, but she didn't fire. Not yet. She needed to know how many. 1, 2, 4, no 6, maybe more behind them, their silhouettes jagged, rifles glinting as they advanced in formation. She lowered her voice. They're coming. Malik straightened instantly, his whisper dying on his lips. Dorsey gripped his rifle tight, the tremor in his hands returning. She didn't look at him. Not yet, let them close, make it count. The words came easy now, steady, sharp. She had been silent for so long that every word felt like iron. They listened, they obeyed. Because in the silence, her voice had become an anchor. The enemy drew closer, 10 meters, 20. Their boots scuffed stone, their breaths harsh. She could see their eyes now, glinting in the dim light. Her finger tightened. The first shot split the dawn. Her bullet tore through the lead man's chest, dropping him instantly. Malik fired next, his shot clean, precise. Dorsey followed, wild but effective, cutting another down. Chaos erupted. Shouts in a language they barely understood, gunfire tearing back at them, ricochets sparking off stone. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. She moved with instinct, her rifle barking, her body reacting faster than thought. She dropped one, then another, her breath steady even as her heart thundered. Malik's voice cut through sharp, left flank. She spun, sighted, fired. 2 men down before they even raised their rifles. But then the return fire grew heavier. Bullets smashed into their wall, chunks of stone exploding, showering them in grit. Dorsey cried out, not from a hit but from fear, his rifle clattering before he snatched it back. "Hold," she shouted. The word carried more than sound, it carried command, wait, resolve. They held. And when the smoke cleared, the enemy was retreating, dragging their dead, shouting in anger. The silence that followed was different, not empty, charged. She lowered her rifle slowly, her breath ragged. They were still alive. For now. Malik leaned back, his chest heaving. His eyes flicked to her, searching, questioning. How long can we keep this up? She didn't answer. Because the truth was sharp and it lived in her chest like a blade. Not long. Dorsey dropped heavily to the ground, sweat dripping, his eyes wide and unfocused. They're not going to stop, you know that. They'll just keep coming until we're gone. His voice cracked and she felt a pang, because beneath his fear he wasn't wrong. She looked at him, then at Malik, then at Ray's still form between them. Her silence stretched, heavy, deliberate. And then she spoke. Then we make dawn our line. They stared at her. She continued, her voice low but firm. We hold until full light, no matter what. Reinforcements won't reach us in time, but light gives us sight. Sight gives us control. That's our chance. Malik nodded slowly, understanding. Dorsey didn't answer, but the way his trembling slowed told her he'd heard what he needed. The silence after her words wasn't despair. It was belief, fragile but real. The minutes crawled again. Dawn inched forward, painting the ruins in pale gray, stretching shadows thin. She stayed at her post, scope raised, eyes burning. Every shift of rubble, every bird, every flicker of movement pulled at her nerves. Her thoughts slipped in and out. Her brother's laugh at the range, his silence at the kitchen table, the weight of promises never spoken. She realized then that this mission, this night, wasn't about orders or maps or objectives. It was about him. Every trigger pull was a conversation she never got to finish. Every silence was the weight of words she had never said. And maybe, just maybe, surviving this wasn't about victory. It was about redemption. Malik broke the silence gently. When this is over, his voice was rough, hesitant. What will you do? She blinked, the question piercing through her exhaustion. If. He gave a faint, tired smile. When? She looked at him, really looked. His face etched with fatigue, his eyes carrying hope like a fragile flame. She wanted to answer, to speak her truth. But the words tangled in her chest. Instead, she said quietly, "I'll tell you when it's over." He nodded, as if that was enough. Maybe it was. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. And somewhere far beyond the ruins, the first true light of dawn touched the horizon, spilling gold into the gray. She closed her eyes for just a breath. And when she opened them, she whispered, not to Malik, not to Dorsey, not even to herself. To the silence. To the end. The sun crested slow, reluctant, as if even light feared what it would reveal. It spilled gold across the ruins, long shadows stretching like scars across stone and sand. The compound walls, jagged and broken, no longer hid their secrets. Everything was visible now. Every body, every bullet mark, every truth. And truth in daylight was merciless. She saw it in Malik's face, the hollow beneath his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped though he forced them straight. She saw it in Dorsey too, the tremor that returned when the shadows were gone, when night no longer cloaked his fear. And she saw it most in Ray's, still, cold, covered, but not forgotten. The silence pressed heavier in daylight. Because now there was no excuse, no night to blame, no darkness to soften the edges, only what they had become after hours of holding a line that should have broken long ago. She adjusted her scope, the rifle biting into her cheek. The air shimmered faintly with heat already rising. In the distance, movement, not a trick of shadow, now clear, defined. They were coming again. Not cautious, not circling, advancing. The enemy had waited out the night too. And now, with dawn burning behind their shoulders, they were ready to finish what darkness had started. Her pulse slowed, her breath steadied. But deep inside, something wavered. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. "Control the quiet and the shot will follow." But what if the quiet wasn't hers anymore? What if the silence was louder than her? Her chest tightened. She thought of the last message she'd never sent him. The words she'd typed, then deleted, then typed again. "Don't go, I need you here." She had never sent it. She had let silence speak for her. And silence had taken him. Now it threatened to take them all. Malik's voice broke through, low but steady. "They're regrouping." She nodded. "We hold." Dorsey let out a sharp laugh, bitter and hollow. "Hold against that." He pointed with his chin toward the advancing line, dozens now, maybe more. Armed, organized, determined. His voice rose, panic threading through. "We can't hold that. We're 3 people and a corpse." The words cut sharper than bullets. She turned, her eyes locking on his. Her voice came out cold, quiet, but it carried. "Then we don't die quiet." The silence after was thick. Malik's jaw clenched, resolve settling in his expression. Even Dorsey stilled, his outburst collapsing into heavy breathing. The weight of her words held them together. For now. The enemy drew closer. Shouts rose, commands barked, boots hammered against earth. She steadied her scope, sighted, waited. Her finger curled against the trigger. The first shot cracked across the morning. A man dropped, his body tumbling into dust. Malik fired next, clean, sharp. Dorsey followed, wild but loud. The battle erupted. Gunfire shattered the morning silence. Bullets tore into walls, ripped through stone, sparked against metal. Dust choked the air, sunlight fractured by chaos. She moved like instinct, her rifle steady, her breath measured. Each pull of the trigger was survival. Each shot a barrier between them and collapse. But the enemy pressed harder. Grenades arced, explosions shook the ground, fragments whistling past her ears. She felt the sting of shrapnel graze her arm, hot blood slicking her sleeve. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. Because if she faltered, even once, they would be gone. Malik shouted, his voice raw, right side moving in. She pivoted, sighted, dropped 2 before they breached the wall, but more surged behind them, relentless. Dorsey screamed as bullets clipped the stone near his head. He fired blindly, shouting curses, until Malik yanked him back, grounding him. She caught Malik's eyes, the silent exchange between them quick, unspoken. "We can't hold forever." She knew it, he knew it. But they didn't say it. Because silence was the only thing keeping despair from breaking them. Her body burned. Her shoulders ached, her cheek throbbed, her lungs dragged fire. She was running on scraps of will, nothing left but grit and memory. And still she fought. Not for orders, not for glory. For them. For Ray's. For Malik's little girl he carried in a photo. For Dorsey's ghosts he whispered into the night. For her brother who never came home. Each shot was for them. Each silence she broke was redemption. The enemy surged again, closer now, their shouts louder, their fire heavier. She dropped another, and another, but her magazine clicked empty. Panic surged, small, sharp, but real. She yanked a fresh mag, slammed it in, racked the bolt. Her hands shook. Not from fear, from exhaustion so deep it felt like her bones might shatter. She clenched her jaw, forcing stillness, forcing control. The rifle barked again, and again. But the line was thinning. They were losing ground. Dorsey cried out suddenly, his voice breaking. "I'm hit." Her head snapped to him. Blood soaked his shoulder, seeping fast. He pressed his hand against it, eyes wild. She crawled to him, ripping fabric, pressing it hard against the wound. "Stay with me." He shook his head, teeth gritted. You can't hold them and me." Her voice cut sharp. "Watch me." He stared at her, pain in his eyes, but also something else. Belief. The silence between them said more than words. Malik covered them, firing in tight bursts, his voice hoarse. "They're pushing harder." She pressed the bandage into Dorsey's wound, then grabbed her rifle again, pivoting back to the fight. Her vision blurred, ears ringing, but she fired anyway. Each shot chipped away at the surge. But still they came. Her brother's voice echoed in her head again. "Don't wait too long." She swallowed hard. The silence was heavy, crushing. And in that silence a thought formed, a truth she had buried all night. They couldn't survive this by holding ground. They had to move. But moving meant leaving Ray's behind. The thought gutted her. She looked at his body, still beneath the poncho. His silence was heavier than all of theirs. To leave him felt like betrayal. But to stay meant death. Her throat closed, tears burned behind her eyes. She forced them back. "Not yet. Not here." She turned to Malik, her voice steady despite the crack inside her. "We move through the east wall, now." He hesitated, eyes flicking to Ray's. She saw the question in them. She answered it with silence. And it was enough. Dorsey groaned as Malik pulled him up, slinging his arm over his shoulder. They staggered toward the breach, bullets snapping around them. She stayed back, rifle raised, covering every step, her body a wall between them and death. Her arms shook, her vision tunneled, but she didn't stop firing. Not until Malik shouted, "We're through." Only then did she move, sprinting low, bullets chewing at the dirt near her feet. She dove through the gap, hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up firing again. They stumbled into the open, the compound behind them erupting with enemy shouts. They weren't safe, not yet. But they were alive. And sometimes that was enough. As they pressed forward, fleeing the ruins that had nearly become their graves, the silence followed. Not empty, not damning, but heavy with everything left unsaid. Ray's body behind them, her brother's memory beside her, the words she had never spoken, the truths she had never voiced. The silence was still hers, but now it carried all of them. Who decides when a mission is truly over? Is it when the last bullet is fired, or when the last secret finally weighs too heavy to carry? She walked alone across the tarmac, boots heavy, shoulders stiff beneath a jacket stained with dust, fuel, and something darker no one could see. The night air pressed cold against her skin. Floodlights cut harsh lines across the airfield, revealing fractured silhouettes of her team. Survivors, wounded, some staring into space, some bent forward with heads buried in their palms. Others clutching photographs they'd kept hidden in their chest pockets, now unfolded like sacred relics. No one cheered. No one spoke. Victory didn't feel like a word that belonged here. Her rifle was gone, surrendered hours earlier when the extraction bird lifted them out of the valley. She'd let go of it without ceremony, but now her hands twitched empty, restless, as if searching for an anchor. For years, steel and weight had steadied her. Tonight she had only silence. She kept walking, avoiding eyes, avoiding voices. Every step brought her closer to the hangar's shadow, a dark cavern where no cameras reached. She needed distance. The field buzzed with the sound of diesel generators, rotors winding down, radios spitting clipped commands. But in her ears there was only the echo of a boy's laugh, a laugh she hadn't heard in 3 years. The boy who wasn't here. Her son. She'd never said his name aloud on deployment. Superstition, fragile protection. As if speaking it would make him too real, too close, too vulnerable. She kept him hidden the same way she kept the photo of him tucked in the lining of her vest, not where bullets could pierce it, but where her heartbeat warmed it. Tonight, as the hangar swallowed her steps, she pressed her palm to her chest. It was still there, creased, smudged, still safe. But safe was a word that didn't belong here either. She leaned against cold steel, finally letting her body sag. Her knees threatened collapse, but she forced them straight. Soldiers weren't supposed to break, not where eyes could see. Yet her eyes burned. Across the field, a medic laughed bitterly, his voice breaking halfway through. A laugh too raw to belong to joy. Another man swore quietly into his hands. A woman, one of the younger operators, no older than 22, sat motionless, helmet still on, visor down. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Grief had many disguises. But no one came near her. They respected her silence, or maybe feared it. She had carried them through when the mission had splintered, when command had cracked under the weight of their own denial. She had been the grit, the anchor, the relentless fire. They knew it. She knew it. And yet, in the spaces between breaths, she wondered if she had burned too much of herself to keep them alive. A voice broke through. "You saved us." Soft, steady, human. It was Morales, the comms specialist who had nearly bled out on her shoulder during the exfil. He stood a few feet away, arm in a sling, his face ashen but his eyes clear. He didn't repeat the words, didn't need to. She looked at him, the silence stretching like a bridge neither of them wanted to cross. Finally, she gave the smallest nod, nothing more. Because inside her something cracked. Saved us? Yes, but at what cost? She didn't say it, couldn't, because Morales's brother was gone, because Chen's voice would never fill a briefing room again, because 3 names would be carved into stone back home, and 3 families would be handed folded flags instead of living, breathing sons. Saved us, the words twisted. Was survival enough? She turned her head, staring at the horizon. The sky was bruised purple, a hint of dawn softening the edges. Beyond the airfield, mountains loomed like silent witnesses. Somewhere out there, in dirt and shadows, pieces of their mission still lingered. Data not retrieved, questions unanswered, enemies uncounted. Was it over, or only paused? Her throat tightened. She thought of the voice on the radio, the one that had nearly betrayed them. The one she still didn't know by name. Someone within their circle had spoken too much, too early. Someone had pulled strings from a safe distance, willing to let them die for leverage. That truth lingered, unresolved. And maybe it always would. But the others, the ones still breathing, needed her silence more than her anger. They needed space to grieve without poison, so she swallowed it. She swallowed everything. A shadow fell beside her, not Morales this time, Colonel Reed. His presence was sharp, authoritative even in exhaustion. He said nothing for a long moment, only stood with her in the cold. She wondered if he had practiced this, being still, being heavy, saying nothing. Maybe he had, or maybe he just didn't know what words could possibly matter now. Finally, he spoke. "They'll want a debrief in 6 hours." She almost laughed. 6 hours. As if 6 lifetimes wouldn't be enough to untangle what they had lived. She didn't answer. Reed shifted, his voice softened. "You held it together out there." She turned, eyes narrowing, held it together. Another phrase, another weight. She thought of the tears she hadn't allowed, the screams she had swallowed, the choices she had made that no one would ever read in a report. Holding it together didn't feel like strength. It felt like punishment. But she nodded anyway. Reed's gaze lingered, searching, but he didn't push. He left her in the dark, footsteps fading into the drone of generators. And then silence again. Her mind returned unbidden to the last moment in the valley, when she'd pulled the trigger that no one else could. The shot that cut through chaos, that turned collapse into survival. It had been clean, precise, necessary. And yet it was the enemy's face she remembered in that instant. It was her son's. His small hand on her cheek the night before she left. His whisper, "Come back, Mom." She had, but the woman who returned was not the one who had kissed him goodbye. Would he know her now? Would he see the shadows she carried? She pressed her forehead against the hangar wall, breath trembling. For a moment she let herself feel it. The fracture, the breaking, not in front of her team, not under the gaze of commanders. Here, in steel and shadow, she let the cracks spread. A single tear fell, then another. She wiped them with the back of her hand, quick, as if even the dark might betray her weakness. But maybe weakness wasn't the right word. Maybe it was just humanity. The engines outside roared, another bird lifting off. Dust swirled through the hangar, stinging her eyes, coating her lips with grit. She tasted iron, metal, fire. She straightened slowly, shoulders rolling back. Her body was wrecked, her spirit fractured, but her will was still iron. The mission had collapsed, and yet she had anchored it, not with glory, not with triumph, with grit, with fire, with the quiet, relentless refusal to let go when everything screamed to surrender. It hadn't made her a hero, it had made her something else. And as she stepped back into the light, as dawn stretched across the mountains, she understood the truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't boast. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply acts. And then it walks away in silence.